Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. It's Friday, April 2nd, Good Friday today, and our 52nd episode. If there had been exactly one per week, we would be exactly at a year, but we're actually just a little bit past, and it's so fun to be here with you. Who'd have thought we were still talking about COVID? We'll update you on the latest news in Michigan and vaccinations. After that, my guest today is Jen Baird from FifthEye, who's going to tell us all about their great new success of their Novo grant from FDA. They got their clearance from FDA, so we're very excited about that. We're going to talk all about that with Jen in a few minutes. After that, Q&A and community check-ins. But first of all, what I want to do is share with you the COVID news, metrics, and vaccine distribution information today, all from covid.cdc.gov. They have been doing a better and better job of getting data out there. Still not quite as clean as covidtracking.org was, but we're finding the information we need. And more than last week, Michigan's transmission level is up through the roof. Almost the entire state is red. You're starting to see it creep into other states as well. Here's what the caseload, the testing, the positivity, and the deaths look like. The caseload has gone up, but please note that the testing has not. It's been very plateaued for the last while. And so the positivity rate is what is creeping up there quite quickly in the vicinity of, I think it's 8.5%, maybe approaching 10% there. The deaths are ticking up, although not very high yet. Hospitalizations have gone up. I didn't grab the graph today, but we were noting that a number of health systems around the state have actually reached 100% bed capacity. I happen to remember that St. Joe's in Ann Arbor is at 98%. I think Sparrow is there, and there's a few others around the state that have hit 100% bed capacity. So very, very interesting. It's interesting also what the demographic is, where we're seeing the most growth in hospital admissions, and that's actually the 40 to 69-year-old range. You saw the large impact in the middle of November and December to both that age group as well as the 70-plus age group. But we're not seeing the 70-plus age group go up quite as dramatically as we are this last week with the 40 to 69-year-old age group. And this is a replacement now for the New York Times images that we've shown in previous weeks. It's really showing you the same data. The percent of the population receiving one or more vaccine doses, over 30% some places on the eastern seaboard and in the plains states, and sort of in that 20-25% range in many places lower in the south. And then if we look at the vaccine administration, the doses administered by date of administration, that's continued to go up in a pretty nice straight line with a few hiccups in between, but that continues to rise as we expect it to. That's the news in the world of COVID. We'll continue to track that as you asked us to do every week, just to give you the latest, but not much more than that to report this week. I do want to let you know that Into Being is looking for a microcontroller firmware developer, and we've posted this before. We are starting to interview for that. But please, if you know somebody who is a firmware developer and who's really passionate about multidisciplinary things, we'd love to talk to them. I was also talking just the other day with our friend Sandra Cochran over at WMed Innovation Center, and they have an opening on 4/27, that's April 27th, a presenter application. What they're doing is actually very similar to what we do on the pitch party on MedTech Crossroads. It's a chance for feedback from investors. And so they have a spot in their lineup on 4/27. So if you know of any high-tech products or services that are beyond the idea stage, where they've completed company formation, and they're actively fundraising from angels or VCs, or going to be fundraising in the next 12 months, and they want an opportunity to pitch for feedback, you can let them know about that opportunity over at the Homer Stryker School of Medicine WMed Innovation Center there. And speaking of the pitch party, we had such a fun time last week. We did our trial 2 months of the pitch party, and we talked with our judges, and we're going to make a few changes. It's going to be continuing, and it's going to be, I think, even more fun than it was those first 2 months. First of all, we're bumping the prize money up. It's still not huge, but we're bumping it up to $2,500. This is now going to be a quarterly competition. And it's still going to be a party, not a competition. We're still focused on feedback, but we are going to make that prize pot a little bit bigger. We had a great chat with our judges. They're all very excited about it and want to continue on with giving the startups their feedback. Of course, Andy Rader from Evergreen M&A Partners, Dr. Nikki Kennedy, founder of Arbor Hive and a vascular surgeon in our community, Jim Metzger of Keystone Solutions Group, and Stacy Frankovich, the program manager at MedHealth out of Techtown. So we're going to continue doing that. The input has not changed very much, but we've underlined a few small changes. The pitch party is open to US-based medtech startups, regardless of their stage. Each startup is going to get 10 minutes at the end of a MedTech Crossroads show, which we do every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And then near the end of the quarter, our panel of judges. So again, not every month, but near the end of the quarter, our panel of judges will discuss the month's candidates before educating us on their thought process and then selecting a winner for the month. The prize has gone up to $2,500, and you can send pitch decks to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org. We'll select between 5 and 10 startups to participate, and the areas that the presentation has to cover in PowerPoint format must cover problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, business model, competitors, and the all-important ask. And we would love to hear from startups that you know of. If you're a startup that's submitted and hasn't heard back, don't worry. You're still on the list for this now quarterly pitch party competition. So sometime late April, early May, we'll begin the pitches again for a judging session at the end of June this year. So with that, that's all the latest news of COVID and of the pitch party. Next up, what I want to do is welcome my guest, Jen Baird of FifthEye, to the show. Hey, Jen.
Hey there. Hi, Dean.
Hey,
hi, everybody.
Thanks for being here. Happy Good Friday.
Happy Good Friday to you.
So this is just so exciting because you guys set out on a rather audacious mission a while ago with FifthEye, and I want you to take us back through that history so make sure our audience understands it, which is where we'll start. But you guys just heard that you got your grant of your de novo from FDA, and yay, congratulations. I think was the date March 2nd, is that right, Jen?
March 1st. March 2nd was when we sent out the press release. March 1st was when we got it.
That's completely incredible. And like we're going to talk about in a bit, a lot of people are scared of de novos. It's like, oh no, that's a scary thing. You're sort of freaking out. Oh no, I can't be a 510K. What are you talking about? But like we've talked about many times on the show, these are just different ways of getting FDA to acknowledge you and to get your clearance. But first of all, congratulations. And second, I guess, take us first of all to FifthEye, to its history, and then start walking us into what AHI is, the product. And then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. So let me start with like the product first, because what does the FDA look at? They look at fully finished devices, right? So you have to have the product before you can have the device. And I started learning about AHI, Analytic for Hemodynamic Instability, back in 2017. Raised money, started the company, pulled people out of U of M to join from data science and computer science backgrounds in 2018. And then we started down the path. We already had license from the University of Michigan, the technology and the core analytic. What we didn't have was it built into a product. And so we started our learning process with the FDA in 2018. And we thought that we were going to be able to do a 510K, and we thought that we would be able to do it maybe 6 to 9 months after we had started down the path. But we knew that it was novel enough and different enough as a continuous monitor for hemodynamic instability that we needed to have a pre-submission meeting with the FDA. So we scheduled that, and we went to visit the FDA in 2018.
Back when you still could go visit the FDA.
Wait, yeah, we could still go visit the FDA, and we went in with a proposed, 510K, because that's what the investors wanted to hear about. Everybody wanted it to be a 510K, but it was a little bit of a round peg, square hole kind of problem. We were talking about a different patient population, a different thing that we were detecting, a different technology. There were a lot of differences. And the FDA swatted us down pretty roundly. And part of it was also our language, in that AHI detects signs of hemodynamic instability. And at the time, and this is kind of an interesting thing that we're exploring right now, it also gives you a heads up about things that are happening in the future. And this has to do with the fact that physiology works this way, right? The doctors and nurses on the call, I'm sure, are like, well, the past, unlike the stock market, where the past never tells you anything about the future results, in their body, actually it does. The body who is sick, it's tendency to stay sick, and hopefully we get better, but it isn't. There is a little bit more predictive nature if you look at how somebody is doing as to where they're going to go and what their trajectory is. And that, so we were talking about prediction. We were using a 510K that was predictive, and yet we were also talking about detecting signs of hemodynamic instability. So lesson one for us in the process was we had to get much clearer about what our language was to communicate with the FDA. So they suggested, well, you aren't like these guys, maybe you're like these other guys. And that led to a second pre-submission meeting where we went and said, hey, we're a 510K like them. And the FDA said, I know we suggested that, but no, not. And so by the third pre-submission, now these take 3 or 4 months every time you go around the horn on a pre-submission meeting. So the timeline is extending out. We did manage to raise more money while we still thought we were 510K, which was a good thing, because 510Ks freak VC investors out a little less than de novos. That is a truism. By the time we got to the third one, we were like, forget it. We are a de novo. We do not believe. We have done a huge amount of diligence to see if we can find a predicate that makes sense, but FDA kept raising issues of patient population and technology and what we were measuring. And the biggest problem was that hemodynamic instability, which is what we're targeting, doesn't have a gold standard measurement out there. So the biggest discussion we had to have with the FDA was, what was our reference standard going to be? And we ended up writing, I would characterize it as a novel of references to prove to the FDA that hemodynamic instability, which does appear in a first-year med student's textbook, is a thing, because the FDA was skeptical that it was a thing, because apparently it's very common for companies to come and say, this is a thing, and the FDA is like, that's not a thing. So you have to be able to prove that when you say it's a thing, it's really a thing. And I say that a little bit, facetiously, but you can understand it's natural for us as developers of new products to brand a thing. So the FDA sees that as you're making something up. So we had to
especially in the realm of diagnostics. I think this is an interesting point for everybody, and something that you have just embraced head on, and you've tackled it, and you've won, right? But this idea of, we could take things like, be it blood pressure or things like that, right? Well, we've been measuring that for years, and there's a number that comes out, and that number has meaning because we understand clinically how we relate to that number. But then you come out and you say, I want to do something that's a little bit different. It's kind of related, but it's a little bit different. FDA is saying, to the point that you just made, yeah, but are people actually measuring this number? What is the standard? Against what are you comparing yourself? And the answer is, is it new or is it not new? Your argument to them was, this metric actually isn't new, but we're getting a better handle around it, it sounds like.
Yeah, and the reality is, what we had to prove, and what the FDA ultimately agreed upon, was that the standard of care for measuring hemodynamic instability is the combination of blood pressure and heart rate. And actually, if you talk to just about anybody who is clinical, and you say hemodynamic instability, we're measuring it as tachycardia plus hypotension, they say, yeah, that makes sense. So conceptually, that was a really good indicator, but we had to prove it. And the problem is, well, there's a lot of different thresholds out there, like how high a heart rate, how low a blood pressure, in combination, not in combination. It's fuzzy. And we had to go around a lot with the FDA to get agreement that this was a valid reference standard. And then we had to show how we were going to measure and validate our device against it. So this brings up problem number 2, which is a really, I'll explain why this was so interesting at the end of the de novo, but let me set it up right now. So we are a continuous measurement device. We update every 2 minutes. We give a new indicator based on a single lead of EKG. Notice, a single lead of EKG does not measure your blood pressure. So we're getting essentially the results of a combination of blood pressure and heart rate from a single lead of EKG. That's what we proved to the FDA. And what's really interesting about that is that to get continuous blood pressure, you need an arterial line. For a continuous measurement device, one of the other big things we had to go round and round about was how do you validate something that's continuous? Most things out there, you diagnose, does the person have breast cancer or don't they have breast cancer? It's a yes or no binary. Sensitivity, specificity is easy to calculate. When you are updating every 2 minutes, a continuous measurement, what are you measuring against? Well, your reference standard needs to be continuous too. And that meant we needed to use continuous blood pressure. That meant we needed to use art lines. That meant we needed to be in ICU patients. But we wanted, and the clinical value is to be able to put this out to patients that are using EKG. And the FDA wanted that too. So fast forward, so we ended up submitting a de novo. And I can talk about the difference between a 510K and a de novo. We ended up getting our de novo granted in 11 months, so a little longer than a 510K, but not actually by very much, because my rule of thumb for a 510K is 6 months. So 6 months to 11 months, not so bad. And it was a little bit prolonged at the end because of COVID. Like we got hit with the, everybody's been deployed for COVID response at the FDA, and that happened to particularly hit the group that we were in. So that delayed us in a way that would normally happen. We may have been able to do it in more like 9 months. So I don't want our 11 months. Now, other people say it's a year is a good benchmark. So somewhere between 9 months and a year is probably a good benchmark. This is an interesting problem, but this idea of having a patient population principle from the FDA is you get what you study, you get who you study, right? That's
from the patient population standpoint.
Yes, from a patient population,
yeah. Yep.
Got to study who you get. So, except that we had made an argument and they had agreed that we had to use art-line patients to get the continuous measurement, but our device could be used by anybody with EKG. So the difference between an art-line population, little tiny, EKG population, much bigger, and art-line patients are almost always in the ICU. We're going into the emergency departments, step-down units, telemetry units. All of these things are interesting, having that kind of arterial line component to this meant that at the very end, one of the big differences between a 510K and a 510K, you say, my device is just like some other device. It's all about the same. In a de novo, you are making the declaration, I am different and new, and I can declare to you what it is that I am, FDA, and I have to prove, instead of proving that I'm the same as somebody else, I have to prove that I am clinically, that the risks are outweighed by the benefits. And so there's a lot more discussion about the risks and benefits and the relative pieces.
De novos are all about safety and efficacy. Yep.
Yeah, it's all about safety and efficacy, and you have to make a whole bunch of arguments that you don't necessarily need to make in the 510K, because essentially the 510K process assumes that if somebody has a 510K, somebody somewhere along the line has proved that this thing is worthwhile to do. When you do a de novo, you have to prove to the FDA that it's worth doing this thing, whatever it is, that makes sense clinically. So we are in this place where what happens when you do a de novo is, instead of just getting your product under a category that already exists, a de novo creates a brand new category, and you get to be the first in your brand new category. Well, what that means is the FDA evaluates everything that you submit, and then they go through a process of writing a category for you. Where we ran into a little bit of trouble when we didn't know, because they don't have to talk to you at all about the category they're writing. In fact, they're really not supposed to. And it turns out that when they were writing the category, they have to write special controls for that category. And they ran into a little bit of a buzzsaw because we were saying, we studied arterial line patients and we want an indication for ECG monitored patients. And that in FDA speak is you studied X and you want Y. And that was innovative as regulatory policy. I would suggest that nobody wants to be innovative in regulatory policy.
That's a great way to say it.
Not your goal. You want to be innovative in many ways, not that one. And I think that hung up a lot of things. Like they told us that we were really close right before Christmas, and January passed and February passed. And part of that was COVID, but part of that was the fact that FDA was, we found out later, was having a little war internally about the fact that they really could see the value of ECG monitored patients, but we hadn't given them data. And they finally called, when our consultant was following up, they called and had a conversation and said, this is the problem. Do you have any data that you can show us? And they said, it doesn't matter if you can, meet all your predefined levels or any of that stuff. Just show us data that it's equivalent in the two populations. And we dashed around, and in a day, we produced a report on intermittent blood pressure-based reference standard. Doesn't perform as well because intermittent blood pressures aren't nearly as good as the gold standard, which is arterial line. But that's a reference standard problem more than it is an AHI problem.
It gave you a way to show that these two populations.
But it gave us a way to show that the differences in performance was 0.2. So we not only gave them the data, we like punched the data in the face, boom. But we hadn't had the opportunity to give that data until we had that conversation. And it was just interesting to see how that policy thing went out. Other part of the story that I think is really sweet is the relationships that were developed along the path. So we had 3 pre-subs and an 11-month de novo review. And in that 11-month de novo review, for the people who've been through this, you get a request for additional information every time, almost every time. We got 2 requests for additional information, which is actually highly unusual, and freaked our consultant out more than a little bit. She was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't happen. And we had probably a half dozen interactive reviews. We had a lot of interaction with the FDA along the process. And they, our lead reviewer said in the very first pre-sub, I really think this is a good product. We should find a way to get it through. And that was one of those sidebar conversations that you get when you go to the FDA and you walk down the hallway with them, because that doesn't happen in the room. That happens while you're walking between the metal detector and the room, or vice versa. So I always felt like our lead reviewer was biased toward finding a way to solve the problem, to get us across the finish line. Now, doesn't mean he wasn't tough as nails, because he was. And it doesn't mean that I am not endlessly impressed by the team that reviewed our stuff. They caught typos, they caught little discrepancies between page 2 and page 802. You were like, I don't even know how you could connect those dots, but they did over and over again. So their thoroughness was amazing. But at the very end, he made that call to give us the opportunity to let us give that extra piece of data that he needed. There was another point in the process when he said, do you have any other data that you could give us on this topic? So he gave us multiple opportunities to fill in gaps that they needed filled. And that was because I believe we were demonstrating very clearly we wanted to give the FDA what they wanted. And we were really working on developing as best you can that kind of relationship, a semi-human relationship with the people on the other side, and remembering that humanness of it. And the way it played out at the very end, this is just, we had said, we really, it was starting to get to be a little bit scary, because we were, things just kept delaying. And I'd already extended our runway almost double from what we had raised before and managed to keep going. but it was getting to be the point where I needed to make a decision. Do I need to raise a bridge? And how am I going to raise a bridge when we've just got FDA hanging out there and we don't know what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be really painful. And so our consultant had communicated that to the FDA and said, hey, this little company really needs you guys to give a move on. And she'd escalated in a good way. And they were really focused on the end of February, because that's when I said I needed to make a decision, which was true. I needed to make a decision. It was going to take me a number of weeks to actually execute the decision, but I needed to decide to start talking to investors, or we were going to run the risk of running out of money. It would have been really awkward if, like, 3 days later they had come back with a review. So it was just this awful situation. He told us on Wednesday, we should have our letter Friday. We were getting all kinds of signals. The letter was coming. Friday didn't happen. And literally it's at 4:48 and our consultant's like, is this not going to happen? And he's like, it's not going to happen. Monday morning for sure. Monday morning comes and goes. Monday afternoon, nope, doesn't happen. It's now 5 o'clock on Monday. And you're like, you thought it was going to be Friday, and now it's 5 o'clock on Monday. And we're like, it's not going to happen again. And we're just like freaking out. My consultant says, I'm not going to worry until it's 7 p.m. And I'm like, okay, because of COVID. I'm like, okay, so it gets to be 7:45. And she's like, I think it's not going to happen. And then at 9 o'clock on Monday night, we get an email and he's like, I'm poking the signature.
Wow.
And we get our letter at 9:45. After our consultant says, I'm not going to bed until this letter. I mean, it was crazy. It was totally crazy. I couldn't believe how hard the effort was going. You could just feel the effort of trying to get this letter out the door happening. And, I think sometimes we think that the FDA isn't working around the clock like the rest of us, or doesn't care. But I think I have a ton of evidence that they can care a lot and they can really try. And they did. So it's kind of cool.
It's amazing too, because when COVID started, we were watching little anecdotes where FDA would say to startups, do you mind if we call you on the weekend? And startups would sort of laugh about it, because FDA never says that. And it's almost like FDA's forgotten now that they're not supposed to work on evenings and weekends, because it's really weird. But that's interesting to hear that was your experience too.
It was really crazy. And there was so much celebration that we had gotten across the finish line, because we had felt very pregnant for a very long time.
Yeah, this wasn't just the 9-month version. This was a little bit longer with COVID in between.
It was pretty crazy. But now we're headed into our next submission for version 2. We're going to be doing a combination of 2 predicates, including our de novo and another one. Actually, one of the ones the same category as the first one that we ever went back with. And we're hoping to submit that in June. So I feel love for the FDA. I mean, seriously, I think what they do is important. I'm glad they're there. I know it sounds a little crazy because it's a pain, but it's also a barrier to entry. And it also gives me more confidence that there is rigor to getting medical devices out there. And I, as a patient, I'm really glad of that, truly. I mean, it's not that everything's perfect, it's not, but I like the fact that it's actually hard to get this done.
It helps to stop the snake oil, that's for sure.
Yep.
And I want to take you back to a point about AHI, which I think was always a question mark, and it's one that we've talked about many times on the show here. And of course, Ken Spencer from MCirc, where AHI got its start, is a frequent contributor to our show. And oftentimes when we're talking about regulatory stuff or software as a medical device, the whole question of machine learning comes up, and FDA has issued some guidances and things like that. But AHI, I believe, is a machine learning algorithm. Is that still a true statement?
AHI was developed using machine learning. That is a true statement.
Okay.
What is not a true statement, and is an interesting question, is there are a lot of times when people say machine learning, they mean analytics that are still learning, that continue to learn. FDA has not gotten their head around how to regulate, and they're still working on it, things that are continuing to learn. So I would describe AHI as a static machine learning trained model. So it's not it's not learning from each new patient that comes through it. It was trained and validated, and now it does its thing. But it was trained using supervised machine learning. So
Supervised machine learning is what allowed AHI to be developed efficiently to the point that it is now. And now
right,
it
it wouldn't have.
represents truth as a model.
Yeah, absolutely. And supervised machine learning essentially means that you are taking a signal and you're giving the machine, as it were, the machine doing the learning, positive and negative. So if you wanted to identify cats from snakes, you'd say, here's a bunch of data, and these are cats and these are snakes. And the machine learning model would figure out how to differentiate a cat from a snake. In our case, we were giving a streaming ECG lead 2 signal, and the analytic of hemodynamic instability actually determines, is this a patient stable or unstable? And we had a bunch of data that differentiated those. And then we figured out what are the patterns in the EKG that are associated with that. And then we did a study, like I told you, that had 96% sensitivity and 85% specificity for identifying those signs of hemodynamic instability. So for those who are, science geeks, 0.91 area under the curve is quite a high performance level.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let me ask you this before we talk about the future. Was there anything you would have done differently at this point? Hindsight being 2020.
I think
it's a hard question because,
it is.
It's not.
Yeah, and you have to learn along the way. It would have been, what I wish we had done is stopped trying to be a 510K sooner. Now, it's really hard when the FDA is saying, we think you're a 510K with that as a predicate. How are you supposed to ignore the fact that, and that's not FDA's role. They're not really supposed to tell you what you are. You're supposed to do that, but they were doing that. And so it was really hard to not take their suggestions to the end game and say 510K, we really want that because it's shorter, it's smoother, it's all those kinds of things. But the reality was, we were a round peg, square hole problem from the beginning, pretty clearly. And if I know what I know now, I would have started on the de novo process sooner, and been less afraid of it, because there's a lot of pressure not to do de novo, and I think it's probably not deserved.
One of the things that I've noticed is oftentimes the startup community and the investment community, as it sort of builds its groupthink and builds its lessons learned, it's often behind whatever's currently coming out, for example, of the agency. And ever since they opened up the de novo pathway to direct access, right? Because you used to have to get shut down on a 510K before you were offered the de novo pathway. And I think what we've seen is that they're not unwilling to walk that pathway with folks. They're totally willing to walk that pathway, and they'd prefer it in many instances when you're trying to shoehorn something into a 510K that just doesn't fit. So certainly what you guys have experienced.
It's hard because they did say, we prefer a 510K, let's see, and they have some discretion, and that's what makes it so tricky, because you have to be substantially equivalent to, not exactly the same. Well, it's in the FDA's judgment, is it sufficiently substantially equivalent to? And that can, I believe, depend a little bit on your reviewer, and how do they conceptualize what you're doing and how similar is it? I think probably one of our first clues should have been maybe that there isn't anybody else doing what we're doing. There still isn't anybody else doing what we're doing. And there isn't. They're just actually, Clue ICU just got a 510K for their hemodynamic instability indicator. That is based on a definition of hemodynamic instability, which is the initiation of vasopressors or inotropes, which are blood pressure drugs that are used in the ICU, just for ICU patients. And it's very illustrative, right? They're in ICU patients because what they're doing is what we were doing, art lines. We were able to kind of make the leap because we could get outside the ICU. But these are new tools that didn't exist before. Now, the crazy thing is that their sensitivity is like 0.6%, 60%, which is like, wow, that's real close to a coin toss.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't want to sell that product. I can tell you that.
Well, that's
Um,
one of the challenges when you have a diagnostic. I mean, I think we're all very familiar at this point with hearing from doctors and surgeons who, when they're offered a new alarm to go off in their patient suite, they kind of go, oh, goodness, no, we don't want more alarms to go off. We don't need more help. We need more consolidation. We need more truth. We don't need more things flashing at us. So, where does AHI rank in terms of that sensitivity?
we are sensitivity is well, it's interesting. When I'm quoting 0.96 sensitivity and 0.85 specificity, which is what we showed the FDA, that's on a Windows basis comparing, a continuous measurement. But when you actually compare it on a patient basis, which the FDA is one of the many sub-analyses they had us do, we're up in the point, I think we're 0.98
Wow.
sensitivity and 0.96 specificity. Don't quote me on that. That's close. It's definitely in the high 0.9s, or 98%. So, and our false positive rate was 4.6%. And our false
Wow.
negative rate was 1.5% on a patient basis. So, the reality is that we do a really good job of measuring hemodynamic instability. It's a really powerful tool, but it's a natural sensitivity that people have. Is how do you measure this? How do you use it? What does it tell you? We have a lot of case studies that show, when somebody, your retrospective case studies at this point, because it hasn't been deployed clinically yet. It's on the path to that, but we're only a few weeks after getting permission to go clinical, so we're not quite there yet. But it's an interesting problem of when you've got patients who come out of surgery and you apply AHI retrospectively, and we have what we call an example of a bounce back. So what happens is somebody comes out of surgery, they actually have a hole that's not closed inside, an internal bleed or an internal exposure. And I'm thinking of one example right now that's got 5 days later, the patient is downgraded and starts down the discharge process. Then they take them for an exploratory surgery and discover, they got 2 liters of blood and stool in their abdomen. And if you look at AHI's been saying that for 5 days.
Wow.
And you hope that if AHI were available, people would go hunting. Why is this patient? We think they're okay. We took them down on a level of care. Clearly, we think they're okay. And then they deteriorate and fall off a cliff, and then we go into exploratory surgery. We have multiple instances of those kinds of situations where the hope is, if you've got an indicator like this that's saying, hey, there's something wrong, this patient's compensating, that you can find out what that wrong thing is sooner and save the patient from more deterioration than needed. That's
What
the
looks like
application.
dropping off a cliff, hopefully, is actually something that you can catch earlier and take
Yeah,
a look for. I
absolutely.
want I want to give the audience also a chance. If you've got questions for Jen, feel free to raise your hand. I want to take you in just a minute here, Jen, to what's next. You mentioned a new submission that you're going to be doing. While
Mhm.
we're waiting to see hands here coming up, I also want to just do a quick screen share for your blog, which is a wonderful read. It's Startup CEO Reflections.
There I am.
There's Jen right there. I love it. But you've been really prolific in terms of getting some of these learnings out, which is why we always have such a fun time talking about it, because you're not afraid to share some of this wisdom that you've gained.
Yeah.
It's not trade secrets, I think, in your mind, and it's really fun to read. So I definitely recommend startupceoreflections.com. Get out there and read
Well, there are
Jen's
two,
stuff.
Gene, there are two, right around the end of February, beginning of March, there are two blog posts on the FDA specifically, given our topic today, because I just felt like it was time to digest and share those kinds of things. So that
You
was,
said the end of
right,
February. We've
you
got the
got them
FDA,
right
our
there.
people too, and
Yep.
effectively engaging the FDA.
Yeah.
There they are, right on the homepage. That's
Yep.
great. Yeah,
There is,
that's
it's fun stuff. And back to your question, We're in conversations with multiple hospital systems now around the country about deploying AHI clinically. And we are in the process of doing version 2 of our product and adding some more predictive capability to it and submitting that as a 510K. My goal is by the end of June. So we're in the middle of a clinical study supporting that. And we are, those are the two biggest things. And of course, we're starting to market the product. So once you had the FDA, we've been working on marketing materials and an upgraded website. And very soon we're going to have a new video added to our website, and training materials. All those kinds of things have been a lot of effort. And and we have clinical studies, interventional studies that are starting or in process of being planned. It's amazing how long those things take to be planned. It feels like we're off to the races at some point. And honestly, we were really fortunate. I am so thankful that we were able to raise a big Series A, led by Arboretum Ventures at the beginning of kind of this process, and that was able to give us enough runway to get through our FDA de novo grant. And now, just 3 weeks after getting that, we've closed the next tranche. So we're actually well funded, and I don't have to fundraise, which I highly recommend if you can possibly pull it off. Don't make getting your de novo or your 510K clearance your trigger for starting to fundraise, because you're so busy, like actually launching your product. You don't want to be trying to do fundraising. So I have some runway to actually try and get some commercial traction before we raise more money. And but that's all, some of the fun, because there's so many opportunities. I mean, you're FDA regulated medical device. You can't market your product until you have their agreement to do that.
That's quite a statement you just made. Don't link your next fundraising to that clearance or that grant. I think that's the opposite of what most people would think to do, but I see the wisdom in what you're saying there.
Well, let me make sure that it's very clear. I did have a milestone that pulled a tranche. So it is linked. I just don't have to go raise new money based on it, right? So I convinced the investors, give me enough money and we won't take the second bolus of money until we get it. But I don't want to be fundraising right in that moment, because that's when I should be focused on launching the product. And for all of those entrepreneurs out there, fundraising is a full-time job on top of running the company, which is a full-time job. And so you're doing multiple full-time jobs when you're really deep in fundraising. And there is an awful lot to be done, and you don't want to take the team's eye off the ball in that moment. And the investors can understand that logic if you lay it out for them. And so we were able to basically negotiate a tranche into our round to enable that to happen. So
you're getting rewarded for your success, but you've pre-sold that. That's not something you're having to worry about when the day comes.
Right. Yeah, because it'd be really hard to take 6 months to raise a round. Rule of thumb, about the same length of time it takes to get a 510K, right?
So you got your grant, but now you're having to raise funds again, and it's not the place you want to be. That's great wisdom. We got a couple of comments and questions here. First of all, I want to go to our friend Ken Spencer, who is live with us. There's Ken.
Hi, Gene. I'm so happy for you guys to get that de novo classification.
Absolutely.
I remember our very first meeting when we showed you AHI there. So it's just wonderful to see this happen. And, and the clinical output is clearly really impressive. I remember a quote from one of the surgeons saying that AHI is like God talking to you. I don't know if you remember that quote.
I've heard that quote. I've heard other quotes like that too.
Yeah. So, but one of the things that's really impressive too is the underlying things that you and your team had to overcome, and what probably makes it difficult for lots of people to just jump in, like time and event sequencing, synchronization, and signal quality and stuff like that. That all had to be solved. So I don't know if I don't want to give away any secret sauce because I couldn't anyway, but some of those underlying problems that exist in what ends up being your solution are really in barriers to entry for a lot of people.
Absolutely. There is, Ken, you're absolutely right. Sometimes I would put FDA in this category. I would put in there we talked about machine learning as part of what led to AHI. The other piece, and probably the more secret sauce, as it were, is the signal processing. One of the things that's quite difficult is real-time signal processing of streaming data. For AHI, we had to invent new math to be able to do that. And so there are some really difficult technical underlying problems that had to be solved. And it does create, as an entrepreneur, I'm on my 5th startup. On one hand, you want problems that are easy to solve because everybody likes easy. But the reality is, as an entrepreneur, you don't really want your problem to be that easy. Because if you are solving a problem that's that easy, you're going to have competition coming out of your ears. And so I actually like it when I find problems that are hard and a team that can solve them. Two things got to go together. It's no fun to have a hard problem that nobody can solve. That sucks. But if you can have a hard problem and solve it, that's a really big deal. And that is something that underlies FifthEye in a really profound way. I bring a lot of experience raising money, leading companies, building companies. The Ashwin Bell, who's our lead, who invented AHI essentially, and is our lead data scientist, and his colleague Bryce and Mark Salamango is a computer scientist, all came out of the MCIRC, Michigan Integrated Research in Critical Care. They were part of inventing and figuring this out. Mark recruited to our team our VP of Engineering, Brandon Baroloni, who is an amazing technical leader. He is like a maestro when it comes to how to put together cloud distributed computing solutions. And he has a team. Our development team is spread across the country, and it's really quite tiny. But they are all masters, and the solutions that they're putting together, they just cut 67% out of our cost base. And the level of solutioning gives you a huge degree of confidence going into the marketplace. And those are the things that make value. And ultimately, that's what makes the product and the company potentially amazing.
That's awesome. Ken, thanks for chiming in. It's so good to see these things all the way from their start to this successful inflection point. Our friend Francis Glory has a question. I'm going to open your mic there, Francis, in case you want to ask it live. Otherwise, I can pass it on, but your mic's open in case you want to unmute there.
He's trying to find the mute button. Come on, Francis.
Find the mute button.
My problem.
And I'll leave him open there in case maybe he comes on here. But his question was, how much customer or user evangelism and education will you have to do? I think that's a great question, because one of the things we often see is adoption. And what does it take? We're very familiar with the world of surgeons, right? And it's like you're not going to change their mind very quickly. Yeah, it's a great question, Francis. What do you think?
It's a great question, and I know Francis, and know why he would ask such a question. It is, so we're de novo, right? That means by definition we're novel. And so I want to answer this question from a couple of different perspectives. When I met Ken, the first thing that I was super excited about AHI, literally from the day that I heard about it for the first time. But the question was, I believed what Mark and Ashwin were telling me, and Ken and Kevin were saying, but I wanted to hear it from the user base. So I went out and did 25 interviews with doctors and nurses. And from my own experience, I want what I'm working on to be intuitive. And one of the quotes kind of captures the theme of that. I didn't have anybody who didn't think it was an important problem and didn't kind of get the problem. And one of the doctors that I talked to said, all roads to death lead through hemodynamic instability. And I thought, oh, that's powerful. And I had a lot of people kind of get it. Remember I told you the definition? People got what it was and why it was valuable. I have worked on other products where the story that you had to tell to convince people you actually were solving a problem they cared about was much more complicated. So when you want to hear people go, yeah, I'd love to have that problem solved. So if that's not happening, be very careful, because it's going to be that evangelism that Francis is talking about. It becomes much, much, much harder. And I have suffered through and had to shut down a company where that was really a big problem. The other aspect of it is selling into hospitals is always hard. Selling into hospitals who have just taken it in the neck from a COVID perspective is not easy. Although we're just now kind of getting going on that. We'll have to see where we go, but I have conversations with chief medical officers and chief quality officers at 3 different nationally recognized hospital systems in the next 3 weeks from 3 introductions. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to close them, but people get the problem and are interested in the solution. But we are going to have to teach people, how do you integrate this into your workflow? And I think that is going to be the trickiest thing, just because nobody's done it before. Like literally nobody's done it before, because it's just now being possible to do it. So we're going to have to do some pioneering and find some places that are willing to be early adopters and explore, and then be willing to talk about how they do it. I think it's going to be, it's just that it's hard to get people to adopt new things, and it's always hard, and you can't ever underestimate it. But if you start with something that people get, and the idea that we are not, somebody said this to me this morning, I was talking to a doctor this morning who said, you're not a rehash of everything that's in the electronic health record again. We have a different source. We're taking the real-time heartbeats of a human being, and we're giving you an update every 2 minutes. That's very different than comparing it to somebody who's taking vital signs, where a nurse is taking the vital signs every 2 hours, every 4 hours, and that's the frequency of the data update that you have. There's an opportunity there to get on top of things much sooner. A gap in time is a gap in monitoring, is what the nurse that we hired. We hired a veteran 20-year nurse. He has been a huge boon to our team because he lives this stuff. And he's like, this resonates, this doesn't. And he's super clear about that. And so the need to understand your environment is so important. And the meeting I'm thinking of this morning, we're talking to 2 champions at a hospital system, and they are like, talk about how it's going to fit into the workflow. That's what we need to be talking about. That's where people got the idea of AHI. Now they need to know, what do I do with it? How do I use it? Where do I access it? The other thing that I want to just highlight, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but it's been coming up so much lately, and I think sometimes we can get really into our box. So I'm a software company. I'm a tech CEO. I get all these doctors and nurses saying, is it an app that I can use on my phone? And my first inclination is to say, app on my phone, native app. It's not. It's actually delivered through a browser. Okay. That's not what they're asking. The light bulb finally went off when one of our champions is like, is it an app? And I'm like, it's not an app. I've been working with you for 2 years now. It's not an app. I'm like, what are you actually asking? And he's like, I want a button on my phone. I'm like, you want a button. You don't want an app. You want a button. And so when you're listening to customers, you have to kind of like listen to what they actually want, and you have to get it out of your own filters. Because when my team here, a bunch of computer scientists and data scientists, they think native app on the phone, iPhone, Android, native app. The users don't care about an app or not an app. The user cares about, on my little screen, is there a button called FifthEye or AHI or whatever that I can push to pull it up like this? And I was talking to my CTO this morning, and he's like, yeah, you just bookmark, bookmark a web page. And I'm like, I'm sure I can bookmark a web. I don't think I've ever bookmarked a web page on my phone. I'm sure it's quite possible. I had never even thought about it. And this is the gap between those of us who are developing these things and our users who will say things to us and we hear them through those filters and we think they mean something. And we actually need to get under the fact that it's just a button. He just wants a shortcut. That's really all he wants is a shortcut. Can we do a shortcut?
Really hearing the
We
voice
can
of
do
the
a shortcut.
customer.
You gotta
The
hear
customer's
them.
not asking for a technological solution. They're asking for something that gets them what they want.
Right.
That's great. We're getting really close to the end of the time here. I want to let one more question in here. And Francis, thank you for that one. Olaf had a couple that I've opened his mic for in case he wants to ask them live.
Okay.
If you're there, Olaf.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Yes.
Olaf.
Okay. Hi, Jen. Super interesting with something like as seemingly polar opposites of FDA and machine learning and so forth. So that's, I think, opening a whole new door of how the FDA would deal with such new technologies in the future. My question, however, is very different. It's about your team. How do you, I guess, in short, compensate the team? So, for example, I'm not talking about Aylin, but or how you pronounce
You've
her
been
name.
on my website.
Right. So, for example,
You
Bill
get
Schmidt.
three.
Right. So, Bill Schmidt, or like a board member as opposed to a chief something officer. Do you have different kind of contracts with them? One is more for like an hourly or monthly consultant fee, and others get a share in future business revenue. How do you think about that?
So you're thinking about startup compensation. So let me tell you, so we are a venture-backed startup, and the investors that you see on our team on the website are venture capitalists.
Gotcha.
So venture capitalists get compensated by their venture funds, and we don't pay them at all. They make their money when we are a successful company.
Yeah.
So we don't actually pay board members. And actually, in my 5 startups, I've never paid a board member because while big companies will pay their board members, it's very uncommon at a small company level. Most of your board members are investors and they make their money. They don't want you to give, they don't want to give you money for you to give it back to them. They want you to give you money for you to put it to work and build value. That's how they really make their money. Now, how do you pay? I think I have some blog posts on this subject a little bit, but the subject of how, this is an interesting problem. I philosophically believe that you should pay your team members, especially when you're doing 3, 5, 7 years, unless you are, have had a bunch of big successes. You are should be paid, compensation. And I think everybody, and this has been true in every startup that I have run, should have some stock options so that they can participate in the upside success of the company and brings everybody into alignment. But when I'm paying my team, I'm actually paying them a salary. It may not be the highest salary they could get at any place, because they also get some stock in the company, but it's a combination of stock. But I do not believe, and actually strongly object to the idea that everybody should be working for sweat equity once you've taken investor money, because there is a balance of risks and different people are risking different things. The team is risking their lives. The investors are risking their capital. There is a balance to be struck there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very helpful insights.
Well
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for that. Great question. Good to have you. Well, this is cool. So Jen, let's take it all the way back down. So I've got a startup and I'm thinking I want to go talk to FDA and do this whole crazy thing that for some reason, you said it's your 5th startup, you keep doing. I think that's the definition of a glutton for punishment. But based on where you are today with your new de novo, let's take top 3 takeaways to leave today with.
Don't be afraid of de novos, because they can be a great fit. Remember that the FDA is made up of people, so relate to them as people as much as you can through the Byzantine process. Just we talk about the FDA like it's this monolithic entity. The reality is it's not. It's a bunch of people, and just like you're building trust in a relationship with a customer, you're also building trust in a relationship with the FDA, and you have to understand the FDA's needs and meet them. And probably the third thing is I am a glutton for punishment, but you know what? It's all about changing the world, and that's why I keep doing it. And so if you think you have something that can change the world, you should absolutely go for it and make it happen.
That's awesome. Jen Baird, FifthEye, so good to have you back. Congratulations on the de
Thank
novo. And
you. It's great.
hopefully 6 months from now, we're going to be having you back on with that second 510K. So
Hopefully,
forward
well,
to it.
actually, we're not going to submit it till June, so we'll talk about it first thing next year.
very good. Very good. All the best to you and your team. Thanks for being with us today.
All right. Thank you.
I'll give just another 30 seconds. We're past the top of the hour. I'll give just another 30 seconds for anybody who's got a Q&A or a announcement for the community that we can let everybody know about. Feel free to raise your hand if you have it. We'll give just about another 30 seconds for that in case there's anything. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for being here on this Good Friday, our 52nd episode. We're well past the first year of MedTech Crossroads. I thank you all so much for being a part of it. We'll see you next week. Have a great one.